In August of 1590, a ship crew rowed toward a small island off the coast of what's now North Carolina. They were looking for 117 people, men, women, and children, English colonists who had been dropped off on this island 3 years earlier and left to build a new life in a new world. What the crew found instead was nothing. No bodies, no signs of a struggle, no burned-out homes, just an empty settlement, a fence built around it that hadn't been there before, and one word carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. That's it. No blood, no message of distress, just a single word, carved carefully, like someone had taken their time to leave it behind. And in over 400 years, nobody has ever definitively figured out what happened to those 117 people. This is the story of the Roanoke Colony, and it's not just an old ghost story. It's a genuine historical mystery that professional archaeologists, historians, and even the U.S. government have spent decades trying to solve. And the deeper you dig into it, the stranger it gets. Let's start at the beginning because the setup matters. In 1584, England was late to the game. Spain already had a massive empire in the Americas: silver, gold, entire cities. England had nothing. So Queen Elizabeth I gave a wealthy explorer named Sir Walter Raleigh permission to establish a colony in the New World, in a region the English called Virginia, named for the Virgin Queen herself. The first attempt, in 1585, was a military outpost. It didn't go well. The colonists ran low on food, tensions with the local indigenous population, the Secotan and Croatoan peoples, boiled over into violence, and within a year, the entire group abandoned the colony and sailed home with Sir Francis Drake, who happened to be passing by. You'd think that would be the end of it. It wasn't. In 1587, Raleigh tried again, but this time it was different. This wasn't a military garrison. It was meant to be a real permanent settlement. Families, farmers, craftsmen, a total of 115 men, women, and children, led by a man named John White, an artist who had actually been on the first expedition and had made detailed paintings of the land and its people. White brought his own daughter and her husband, and just weeks after they landed, his daughter gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Virginia Dare. She was the first English child ever born in what would become the United States. For a moment, it must have felt like hope, a new life, literally born on new soil. But almost immediately, things started going wrong. Supplies were already running low. The relationship with local tribes was fragile at best, hostile at worst, partly because of what had happened during the first failed colony. And winter was coming. So the colonists made a decision. They asked John White to sail back to England and bring more supplies before the ships lost their weather window. White didn't want to go. He was leaving behind his daughter, his infant granddaughter, everyone he had crossed an ocean with. But the colonists convinced him it was the only way. He left in late 1587, expecting to be back within months. He didn't return for 3 years. Here's why, and this part is almost as wild as the mystery itself. White got back to England right as war broke out with Spain. The Spanish Armada was preparing to invade. Queen Elizabeth ordered every available ship to stay in English waters for national defense. White couldn't get a ship, couldn't get supplies, couldn't do anything except watch the war unfold while his family sat on the other side of the Atlantic, waiting. By the time he finally got passage back to Roanoke in August 1590, it was August. 3 years had passed, and when he and the crew rowed ashore, calling out for his family, for anyone, there was silence. The settlement was gone. Not destroyed, just dismantled. Houses had been taken apart carefully, not burned or wrecked. There was a fortified wall standing where there hadn't been one before, and that single carved word, Croatoan. Before he'd left, White and the colonists had agreed on a signal. If they had to leave for some reason, they'd carve their destination into a tree or post. If they'd left because of danger or attack, they were supposed to also carve a cross above it. There was no cross, which meant, as far as the agreed-upon code went, this wasn't an emergency. This was a plan. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, home to a native tribe that the colonists actually had a friendly relationship with, unlike some of the other indigenous groups in the area. So the most straightforward reading is that the colonists left peacefully, on purpose, to go live with or near the Croatoan peoples on what's now Hatteras Island, possibly blending into their society entirely. This isn't just speculation. In the early 1700s, over 100 years later, an English explorer named John Lawson visited Hatteras Island and wrote that some of the native people there had gray eyes, a trait not typically found in the local population, and that their oral tradition spoke of ancestors who could talk in a book, meaning they were literate, like the English colonists would have been. Modern archaeological digs on Hatteras Island have found European-style artifacts, gun parts, a signet ring, tools, mixed in with Native American items from the same time period. Not proof, but a strong hint that some kind of blending happened. Theory number 2 is the Chesapeake theory. Some historians believe the colonists actually didn't stay near Roanoke at all. They moved north to live among the Chesapeake tribe, further up the coast. This theory gets dark fast because later colonial accounts from Jamestown, established in 1607, describe the powerful chief Powhatan telling English settlers that he had ordered an attack on a group of English-speaking people living among a rival tribe, wiping them out right around the time Jamestown was founded. If true, this would mean the Roanoke colonists survived for 20 years among native allies, only to be killed just before rescue might have finally come. Theory number 3 is simpler and grimmer. Disease and starvation, no mystery required. A vulnerable, isolated colony with no reliable food source and no immunity to local illnesses could have simply died out, with survivors scattering or perishing individually rather than as a group. This doesn't fully explain the careful dismantling of the settlement and the calm, deliberate carving of a single word, but it's the least dramatic and, to some historians, the most statistically plausible explanation. And then there's the more recent archaeological twist. In the 2010s, a research group called the First Colony Foundation was examining an old map that John White himself had drawn back in the 1580s. Using modern imaging technology, they discovered a hidden mark on the map, a small patch that had been covered up, revealing the symbol for a fort roughly 50 miles inland from Roanoke. Excavations at that site turned up pottery fragments and other items consistent with late 1500s English colonial life. Did some of the colonists split off and head inland, building a second refuge? Right now, nobody can say for certain, but it's a real physical clue, uncovered on a document that had been sitting in a British museum for over 400 years, hidden in plain sight the entire time. So where does that leave us? Probably some combination of everything. A struggling colony, desperate for food and safety, likely split into smaller groups. Some probably went to live among the Croatoan, blending into their community over generations. Others may have moved inland or north, and some of those groups may have met a violent end. There likely wasn't one single dramatic disappearance. There were probably several quiet ones, spread out over years, each one erasing a little more evidence of what had happened to them. What makes Roanoke different from most historical mysteries is that it's not ancient. It isn't shrouded in the fog of a civilization we barely understand. This happened in a country with written records, in a colony connected to a global empire, involving real people with real names we still know today. Virginia Dare, John White, Ananias Dare. And yet, the most basic question, what happened to them, has never been definitively answered. Archaeologists are still digging. New excavations happen almost every year on Hatteras Island and around the original Roanoke site, and every few years a new fragment of evidence shifts the conversation slightly. It's entirely possible that within our lifetimes, someone will finally uncover the piece of the puzzle that closes this case for good. Until then, the only trace of an answer is a single word carved into a wooden post left behind by 117 people who knew exactly what they were doing and never got the chance to explain it to anyone else. Croatoan. 4 centuries later, we're still trying to figure out what it means.